Well, good afternoon, coasters. Miserable day out there, sitting by the fire. Favourite subject, SNAs. You know my position on it. Legalised theft. It's just wrong. Now, I've received a letter from Groundswell West Coast. Now, the government, of course, refuses to acknowledge Groundswell, but I tell you what, they've got such a huge following around New Zealand that they're worth listening to. Here's their letter. On behalf of our West Coast community, we're very disappointed in the decision of the Te Tai Potini Committee, that's the TTPP, to forge ahead with significant natural area, that's SNA mapping. Forcing this appalling policy onto landowners will be extremely disruptive to the council, community relationships, and it'll cause a huge upheaval, similar to what we've seen in Northland. In light of how bad this SNA policy is, Groundswell New Zealand wrote to all councils requesting those in the process of plan reviews, including SNAs, hit the pause button. All replies to date from councils currently in the SNA process have agreed to pause. The West Coast councils are the first to reject the request. We'd like to thank Tania Gibson, Bruce Smith, Alan Birchfield, Francois Tumahai for voting against the SNA process, and we commend their courage going against the poor legal advice they were given. Now, Groundswell New Zealand have called for all landowners to deny access for SNA mapping, and we have committed to a range of actions to ensure that this SNA policy is stopped. Now, we urge the TTPP committee to reconsider its decision, and we ask those members that agreed to continue the SNA policy to table a motion halting the combined plan process. We note that the concerns relating to SNAs equally apply to wetlands and landscape zonings. We are concerned that the TTPP committee were not provided accurate or full advice relating to SNAs. We note the following. 1. The legal advice refers to the requirement of the West Coast Regional Policy Statement to identify SNAs. Objective 1. However, the legal advice fails to mention that pursuing Objective 1 in this current political climate will fail to achieve Objectives 2, 3 and 4. Objective 3 specifically relates to people and communities' economic, social and cultural well-being. 2. The legal opinion takes a simplistic and theoretical view of the law. It fails to recognise that regulation or identification do not protect SNAs, and that the actions and inactions of landowners are a key determinant. The recent 2016 local government report addressing New Zealand's biodiversity challenge highlighted, in fact, that the number one threat to our biodiversity is weeds and pests. To deal with this threat requires active management. Regulation does not assist active management. The buy-in of landowners is fundamental to actively managing and protecting biodiversity. The SNA mapping and regulation policy fails to achieve landowner buy-in and protect SNAs. 3. In the 2016 Hiranui District Plan, it reviewed and all SNA mapping was removed. Extensive evidence clearly demonstrated how the SNA identification, mapping and regulation policy failed to protect SNAs, as well as being counterproductive to the community and council relationships and people's well-being. We believe this evidence of the failure of the SNA policy was a main reason why there were no appeals in Hiranui, and the decision to remove all SNAs mapped is now law. No appeals. 4. The legal opinion has significantly understated the impacts of the SNA policy. The more that landowners have done to protect biodiversity on their land, the more they will be subject to bureaucratic interference, regulation and costs. There is also evidence that SNA mapping impacts property values, and there can be a substantial loss of property value where a large percentage of a given property is zoned as an SNA. It is an appalling policy that penalises the most conservation-minded landowners. The legal opinion states that if the councils do not implement the SNA mapping policy and rules, then the Environment Court will. That may have happened in the past, but not today. Groundswell has put a stake in the ground on unworkable regulations and will not tolerate moves by higher authorities attempts to override the wishes and the best interests of councils and their communities. And Groundswell is committed to supporting any council that pauses or refuses to action the SNA policy. Now, Groundswell have asked the TTPP committee to reconsider the decision and reply back to them. Interesting, isn't it? Now let me tell you, we're not the only ones fighting this battle. The West Coast Regional Council had its meeting last Tuesday, and the battle has continued. Long-time councillor and coaster Peter Ewan set out clearly his and his community's concerns and views. Brent Cummings, another coaster, reinforced Peter Ewan's view and spoke passionately about the rights that exist with private land. Ngāti Waewae Chairman Francois Tumahai spoke strongly in support of what he called land theft, something that Maori has endured historically. Chairman Alan Birchfield signalled that it was up to the West Coast people to ensure that those opposed, or who had opposed, the call for a halt on SNAs didn't appear in the next council. Jackie Douglas, who represents Makawhio, spoke strongly in support of ensuring that SNAs were not considered. Now, there were two councillors who were pretty quiet on the whole deal. Stuart Challenger, Laura Cole. They may have had their reasons. Now here's the extract from the meeting. Have a listen. You'll be impressed.